For those preparing for UGC Net Management, Chapter 4, Business Ethics and Corporate Social Responsibility, is one of the most significant sections of the syllabus. It is also a section where students frequently lose marks. The volume of content in this chapter often leads to a fragmented understanding, making it difficult to apply these concepts to the complex case studies found in the exam. To master this material, we are dividing the chapter into two distinct frameworks. Block 1 covers the principles of ethics and value-based organizations. Block 2 covers corporate social responsibility and corporate governance. This masterclass is focused entirely on the first block. We are moving past the memorization of definitions to build the structural logic of corporate ethics from the ground up. We begin with the root definition. The term ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, meaning custom or character, representing social norms. In a commercial context, this manifests as the trade-off definition of business ethics. Every company exists in a state of tension between two forces: the need to hit economic objectives and the obligation to the society where it operates. Business ethics is the mechanism used to navigate that conflict. To manage this trade-off, organizations typically operate under one of three philosophical systems. This chart contrasts the first two systems. On the left is deontological ethics, propounded by Immanuel Kant. This system argues that an act is morally good based on its features and the duty it fulfills, regardless of what the final outcome happens to be. On the right is teleological ethics, or consequentialism. In this system, the end result is the sole determinant of morality. If the consequences are good, the act is considered moral. The third system is virtue-based ethics. This moves the focus away from rules or results and places it on the character of the decision-maker, prioritizing the development of good habits and integrity. For a manager, ethical decision-making isn't a reaction to a feeling. It is a conscious choice of which of these three operating systems will guide their actions. When these philosophical systems are forced to compete, it creates an ethical dilemma, a paradox where a manager must choose between two conflicting claims or two morally undesirable options. Peter Drucker defined the stakes of these moments by stating that ethics deal primarily with the right action of the individuals. These dilemmas are often caused by specific workplace pressures. The first is coercion by management, where a singular focus on profit forces employees to act against their own moral judgment. The second cause is individual ambition or financial pressure, leading a worker to follow an unjust path in search of recognition or gain. The third cause occurs in high-stakes negotiations, where the pressure to close a deal creates a temptation to mislead or bribe the other party. These scenarios create immense psychological strain for an employee, caught between the requirements of their job and the requirements of their conscience. Because a dilemma by definition involves a choice between two valid or two undesirable paths, intuition is insufficient. A manager requires a repeatable framework to resolve the conflict. That framework is J. Black's Potter Box model, a mechanical tool for step-by-step ethical resolution. This diagram shows the process. Step 1 is to define the dilemma objectively. Step 2 is to identify the competing values, weighing professional standards against sociocultural values like honesty. In Step 3, we develop accountable principles. This is where the manager applies the philosophical systems we discussed earlier, such as Kantian duty or utilitarian results, to the specific facts of the case. Step 4 involves comparing alternatives based on loyalty to stakeholders. Step 5 is monitoring the results to help frame future policy. While the Potter Box provides the steps for an individual decision, the organization as a whole must be guided by a broader concept of justice. This involves a contrast between distributive justice, which focuses on the fair distribution of goods, and procedural justice, which focuses on the fairness of the company's internal processes and rules. A company might also view actions through the lenses of restorative, retributive, commutative, or communitarian justice, depending on its specific organizational goals. If the Potter Box is the sequence of steps a manager takes, the concept of justice is the compass that ensures those steps lead to a morally sound outcome. While individual frameworks like the Potter Box work for localized dilemmas, they face a limitation as a company grows. In an organization with thousands of employees, it is no longer efficient to rely on every individual to manually process these steps in isolation. To maintain consistency at this scale, ethical decision-making must be institutionalized into a formal ethics program. When this institutionalization is successful, the company becomes a value-based organization, or VBO. Traditional companies often rely on rigid authoritarian structures. A VBO, however, operates as a living culture where core beliefs and ground rules guide the behavior of the employees more effectively than top-down commands. This model is proven by the success of Indian VBOs like Tata, which prioritizes unity and integrity, and Infosys, which is built on a foundation of fairness and transparency. By institutionalizing these values, a VBO creates an environment where ethical choices become the standard behavior for the entire workforce, providing stability even during periods of market volatility. This pyramid shows how these concepts link together. We started with the root of individual ethos, used the Potter box to resolve specific dilemmas, and scaled those principles up to build a value-based organization. Block 1 of the Chapter 4 roadmap is now complete. However, everything we have discussed so far has been about voluntary ethics. The next challenge is understanding what happens when ethics are no longer a choice, but a legal requirement. This leads us into Block 2. We will examine the legal compliance of Section 135 of the Companies Act 2013 and the mandate that requires specific companies to spend 2% of their net profit on CSR activities. Ensure you have a clear grasp of the philosophical systems from Block 1, as they form the foundation for the legal frameworks we will cover next. Masterclass complete. For a long time, the unspoken assumption in the corporate world was simple. The ultimate and single rule of business is to maximize profit. But history provides a clear picture of what happens in a vacuum where revenue is the sole priority. When unchecked greed dictates decisions, you get massive corporate failures, like Enron or Satyam, where an aggressive pursuit of wealth destroys the company from the inside out and leaves society picking up the pieces. To prevent those kinds of catastrophic collapses, modern businesses rely on two specific safety nets. The first is corporate social responsibility, the company's duty to the outside world. The second is corporate governance, the internal checks and balances on its own leadership. A massive enterprise cannot survive in the long run simply by printing money. It has to actively balance the impact it makes on society with rigorous, independent controls over the executives making the decisions. Corporate social responsibility requires an enduring, structured commitment to integrate operations into the welfare of society. It is a systemic process, distinct from arbitrary, feel-good charity. Historically, there was stiff resistance to this idea. Economist Milton Friedman famously argued that a corporation's singular social responsibility is to use its resources to generate profit for its shareholders and pay taxes. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum is Mahatma Gandhi's trusteeship model. This philosophy argues that corporations do not truly own their massive wealth. Instead, they merely hold it in trust on behalf of the public and are obligated to use it for the betterment of society. Today, we rely on Carroll's pyramid to map out these obligations. As you can see in this diagram, it divides a company's responsibilities into 4 distinct levels: economic, legal, ethical, and finally, philanthropic. The base of the pyramid highlights a hard operational truth. A company has to ensure its economic survival and legal compliance first. If it cannot pay its workers or follow the law, it cannot meaningfully move up to achieve those higher-tier ethical and philanthropic goals. Achieving true CSR demands a rigid, step-by-step evolution of how a company handles its resources. While those models outline the global theory, for companies operating in India, this commitment is no longer voluntary. It is enforced by the state. Under Section 135 of the Companies Act, we see the exact calculation. A qualifying company is legally required to spend at least 2% of its average net profits from the preceding 3 years on designated CSR activities. And if we look at the criteria listed slightly above that, the triggers are clearly defined. Any company with a net worth of at least 500 crore rupees or a turnover of 1,000 crore rupees is forced to comply. They must direct those funds into approved channels, like slum area development or rural educational programs. With this legislation, the Indian government took a philosophical debate and turned it into an unavoidable mathematical compliance requirement. But external laws only work if the internal operations of a company are sound. Who is actually watching the managers to make sure they follow these CSR rules? This brings us to the core operational conflict of modern business. The people who own a corporation, the shareholders, are rarely the same people running it daily. This divide creates agency theory. The managers act as agents for the owners, but they might be tempted to exploit resources or take massive risks for personal gain. Conversely, stewardship theory posits that these managers act as inherent guardians of the corporation, naturally motivated to maximize returns and protect the shareholders' interests. To manage this relationship, different regions use different structures, as detailed in this textbook breakdown of corporate governance models. The American, or Anglo-Saxon model, relies on a single-tier board driven by individual shareholders. The German model uses a strict two-tier system, separating the management board from a supervisory board for tighter control. Corporate governance serves as the essential internal policing system, aligning an executive's daily decisions with the financial goals of the owners and society's legal expectations. In India, keeping that internal policing system honest falls to powerful external watchdogs, specifically the Securities and Exchange Board of India and the mechanisms of the Companies Act. For instance, under Clause 49 of the listing agreement, it mandates that if a company has an executive chairman, at least 50% of the board must consist of independent directors, people with absolutely no personal ties to the company's daily operations. These structural requirements exist because a stack of well-written policies means nothing if the board of directors is compromised by self-interest. Individual ethics form the foundation of strong corporate governance. That rigorous governance creates a healthy, transparent internal culture, and only when a company is healthy on the inside can it execute genuine, lasting social responsibility on the outside.